I'll be talking about a little intro to the changing video landscape and how the whole idea about Dolby Vision came about, and then what exactly is the objective of Dolby Vision, how does it help enhance the user experience, and then we'll talk a little as non-technical as possible about what Dolby Vision actually is and what it does, without deep diving into it, just to give you an idea of how it works and what it will help with. And then I'll hand over to Andreas, who will explain the whole workflow. And at the end, as Gaurav mentioned, we'll have the Q&A. So till now, we had, experienced, very recently, we had experienced high definition television. So that when HDTV came a few years back, it was like the big thing. And, and now after almost like about maybe a decade of having experienced HDTV, we have also moved on, further. And so we have experienced 2K, 4K, and now we are looking at, moving to 8K images and videos. So that is typically what you might have seen, heard, and experienced about, the enhancement of the video over the last, decade. But that's only one part of it. And with modern digital cinema cameras and digital video cameras, today actually we have the scope of capturing the raw images, and which actually have a lot more information that is captured but not necessarily seen on the screen. So that is where the Dolby Vision technology comes in, and I'll explain a bit of that as we go. But to understand, what I talked about was over the last decade, we have seen, the enhancement in the image in terms of resolution. So we had 2K, then we had 4K, and then we had now moving to 6K and 8K. That is all about just one aspect of the video image, that is the resolution. And while that definitely helps enhance the image on screen, but that's not the only thing, or not the most important part. And that is what we'll talk about today. So let's take a look at it. What was the challenge of this existing video technology that we had for so long? It's actually a very, very old technology. It's a 50-year-old standard. What we call in technical terms the standard dynamic range, or SDR. And some of you might be familiar with the term. And in a little more technical terms, it's called the Rec 709 image. So it's a very old standard, and it's based on what you see on screen, the CRT television. So it's primarily based on that technology, which kind of doesn't exist today. Your CRT televisions really don't exist today. And that is why we can actually, kind of do away with the legacy and just move ahead. So what were the major drawbacks of this image that we are being used to seeing for so long? One, it was limited brightness or luminance range. It had a very, very narrow contrast range, so you couldn't really, see high contrast images like our eyes would perceive in real life. And you had a limitation of the range of colors that you could, actually reproduce with this technology. Till you compare it with something better, you think that was good enough. And that is what we will discover today. So one was the enhancement of the image. How can we really, see better images, experience better images? Second is, like today, we are used to watching images on a variety of, devices or on a variety of screens. So you have the ultimate cinema experience, then you have your flat screen, big televisions, you have your iPads and mobile devices, whatsoever, your laptop and screens. So you have a variety of displays and image displays or screens where you experience your image. And from common experience, you would have realized that the experience is not always necessarily consistent enough, and that is what is Dolby Vision's another aim or goal, to deliver a consistent image quality, irrespective of what device you're watching it on. So let's see what are the aspects of the image that we are looking into in this so-called next generation video that we are talking about, and what is the objective. The objective is very clear. better images and a consistent experience. So two important things that we'll be, kind of focusing on, or which we have aimed to, achieve with this technology, Dolby Vision HDR. And let's take a look at very quickly at the different ways one can enhance image. The first thing that I talked about was resolution. As you increase the resolution, you can get a better and better, image coverage from a particular display. So when you have more resolution, basically you have more pixels and a finer pixels. So that is one way you can get better images. So we had standard definition images, then we moved to HD. Now we have UHD, which is 4K, or even you're aiming for 6K and 8K. So that's one way you can enhance the image. The second is higher frame rate. Now, especially this is useful when you have moving images and images that are moving very fast. Action stuff like racing cars and moving bikes and like racing athletes, whatever, as you can see on this image on screen. So a standard image would be like 25 or 50 FPS, or maybe 60 FPS or 30 FPS, depends on which region you are in. So different standards are followed. And with higher frame rate, basically what we attempt to do is capture a much sharper image without the trails that you can see. You can see a kind of ghost image on the slow frame rate image, a trailing video, a blur kind of thing. That will not be, the case when you have a high frame rate image. So that is another way you can kind of, get better images. And lastly, what we at Dolby have aimed to do is, we are looking at the core constituent of the image, that is the pixel. And what we aim to do is, with Dolby Vision HDR, we try to improve each pixel of the image, not by just increasing the number of pixels or making the pixels refresh faster, but enhancing the individual pixel itself. And which means that now each individual pixel can have a higher range of brightness or luminance. So it can be deeper, blacks than what you would achieve previously, or it can be a extremely bright white pixel, or anything in between. And in terms of color, what we are aiming is a much wider color gamut, which is what we use as the P3 color gamut technically. So by looking into these two aspects of the individual pixel, we will eventually get a much brighter image. As you can see on the right side, is the high dynamic range image, and compared to the standard dynamic range image which you see on the left of the two paragraphs. So if you do not compare, you would think that that image looks good enough. The moment you see in comparison what the high dynamic range image can actually look like, it's mind-blowing. It's something that kind of, it's easy to replicate what we actually see with our eyes. Human vision is very, very, very powerful, and I'll quickly talk about that a little later. So overall, when we talk about better pixels, we have basically brighter images wherever necessary. It's not necessarily that the entire frame has to be extremely bright, but certain constituents of the image which have highlights and which can go brighter than what is currently possible. So that's how we play with the images. Andreas will be talking a little more about it. And obviously, we have, as a result of deeper blacks and brighter whites, we have a greater contrast. And as a result of that, a side effect of that is your images start looking even more sharper than you would otherwise see them. And obviously, you have many, many more hues, and you have much more saturated colors that you can experience with Dolby Vision HDR images. So that's the whole objective. And let us quickly see what exactly happens with Dolby Vision. So like I said, it's about enhancing each pixel to have more brightness range and colors. And the idea was to kind of replicate what we are able to see with our naked eye, And this diagram will kind of explain to you that, what is the kind of brightness and color ranges that exist in nature, and how much of that do we see with the naked eye. So this is, if you see the range of colors and the brightness range, so this is extremely wide, and this is what our eyes can perceive. And that is why when you capture images and look at photographs or look at video images, you feel that it's not really looking as great as what you had seen with your eye. And the reason is that the current technologies, imaging technologies, actually take this whole input range, but are able to display only a small fraction of it. So, for example, if you look at the modern day regular television displays, they display a very narrow range of brightness and colors as compared to what can exist in real life, or what our eyes can kind of perceive and uh, decode, so to say. So that's the kind of squeezing of the whole image quality that happens. And what we aim to do with Dolby Vision is kind of widen up this aperture, so to say, and try and reproduce as close as possible the original range of colors and brightness, so that now if you see this Dolby Vision HDR display, this will be able to reproduce a far wider range of colors and brightness range, and that will look much better to our eyes. So that is the idea. And how our eyes actually perceive such a huge range of brightness and colors is something which is interesting, and which was part of our study when we developed the technology of Dolby Vision. So our eyes, the range, the human vision range, what we say is adaptive, because while you can see that the actual range might be limited to this window over here, which is about 10,000 nits, but this range is not fixed. For example, this range can slide down to give you better sense of dark areas. For example, suddenly someone turns off the light in a room and it becomes completely dark. It takes your eyes a couple of seconds maybe to adjust, but then suddenly you start to see things in that dark room also. So that is the beauty. Our eyes can quickly adapt. It goes down, and then the sensitivity for the dark images kind of becomes better, and you can perceive those dark areas also very clearly. Similarly, you step out into extreme bright sunlight in the outdoors, your eyes take again a couple of seconds to adjust to it, but then you can start seeing a bright blue sky, for example, without too much of a difficulty. It's actually extremely bright, but our eyes can adapt to it, and so we have a kind of a sliding window for the range of brightness that our eyes can adapt to. So this is the real world. It's extremely wide, as you can see, and our eyes can go, pretty high, or pretty low in terms of adapting to that extreme dark and bright images. Whereas, our current television is limited to a very small range, which we technically call 100 nits of brightness or luminance. And the cinema screen, unlike what we perceive, we think that a big cinema screen is actually so better to watch because it's probably brighter. Actually, it's not brighter, but it's actually even less bright than a regular TV screen. But our aim was to create a future display technology that could be comparable to what our eyes can natively, kind of fit in terms of the range. And that is how, we developed Dolby Vision, which technology, which caters to this range of about 10,000 nits of, brightness range. I think all these figures don't make much sense to you, but when the technology was developed, it was extremely difficult to actually display such bright images on any consumer display device, because we had to do this test with a lot of audience to kind of gauge what was the preference for better images. And so, as you can see, this is interesting. So LCD screen was taken, but instead of using the regular backlight, which wouldn't go bright enough, huge projector was used to kind of used as a backlight to kind of uh, able to illuminate the screen to extreme brightness. So, and the interesting result of that was, out of all the candidates that were exposed to these bright images, so we got a result which said that the general preference was of people liking images that went up to 10,000 nits of brightness and which would go deep down. So if you look at this, this is the range, so this was kind of the range that people preferred. And so that was how we decided what should be the range to accommodate for our technology. And if you look at the kind of colors that we are talking about, incorporating wider, gamut of colors in the Dolby Vision technology. So a regular standard dynamic range image has a very, very small, color reproduction capability. So if you see the small triangle, the smallest triangle inside, that's the Rec 709, color reproduction kind of range. So as you can see, what we achieve with Dolby Vision is to extend it to the DCI P3 color space, as we call it. You have a wider range of greens and reds and blues, and the maximum that we can actually utilize in modern displays is a little bigger than the P3, which is Rec 2020, and which will probably become the standard in the next few years. So that is the widest that can be accommodated by some of the modern displays. But our human vision, as you can see, is even wider than that. So that's the outer boundary that you see is what our human vision can actually, perceive. And when we move from this Rec 709 to this Rec 2020, you have a much bigger color volume, which means you have much wider range of colors of use and brighter colors as well. So, and that's what makes the images look so much more outstanding. And Dolby Vision is primarily, a process that kicks in the post-production. So what Andreas will be talking about just immediately now after my couple of more slides. So rest of the process kind of remains a little unchanged, not entirely. So because we use modern digital cameras which can capture raw images, so if you're capturing at source with raw images, that is ideal for the Dolby Vision processing in the post. The editing does not necessarily need to be changed in terms of workflow right now, and then you bring in the raw footage from the shoot that was captured, and then you bring a reference edit, and you kind of start your post-process work in the color grading suite. And that's what Andreas will explain. And that's where you finish it off with Dolby Vision. And in Dolby Vision, as you can see, there's something called the Dolby Vision metadata, which actually helps to create all the magic. And then that metadata is carried all the way across to the end user, where you play back your content on your Dolby Vision televisions or gaming consoles and through other devices, which support Dolby Vision. And that metadata is what is used to kind of ensure that whatever your display capability is, the image reproduction will be, consistent with what was graded in the grading suite and what was the final look on the master. So this is like a very broad introduction, and since most of you will be using high-end digital cameras today, all you have to do is be careful that if you can shoot in an uncompressed format, because when you record in compressed formats, you lose a lot of the color and brightness information at source itself, and then it kind of becomes a big challenge to really get that enhanced look of what was possible, what was actually seen by your eyes. So that is something that you have to keep in mind. And since we wanted to keep this very non-technical, I won't really go into any more technical details. Highlight that this metadata, Dolby Vision metadata, is something that we call dynamic metadata because it kind of changes shot to shot or scene by scene basis, and that is what helps to also keep the best possible image on your screen. So that's basically it. And as you can see, there are a lot of end user devices that support Dolby Vision. Just to give you a sense of how much this technology is supported across various manufacturers and various devices, and that is why the technology has already become very, very popular today. That's it. I don't want to talk anymore, and I would like to hand over the next to Andreas to talk about what actually happens. How does he actually create that magic with Dolby Vision? And as Gaurav mentioned, we'll have Q&A at the end of the session. So please note down anything that you would like to ask, and we would be happy to answer your queries. Okay, and if you want to reach out to me for any details, that's my email ID, and you're welcome to reach out to me for any further details. That's it. Over to you, Henry, and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you very much. So today I want to talk about HDR and about Dolby Vision in 4 different stages. That's my workflow that I'm using, that I've developed over the last years. And I can tell you that stage number 4 is everything about post-production. And some of you might know that I've changed my profession a little bit from post-production, a colorist, going into production, 50%. I changed to the dark side. And the way it came, I think is quite important to understand the whole process, which I'm explaining today. So I got a call last year if I would like to come to Dubai to build up the grading department for a new post-production, which is part of a new OTT platform, which will launch next year in the Arabic world. I said, okay, I can do this. And they need someone, of course, who's a colorist and who can knows everything about HDR and Dolby Vision. And I said, yes, interesting, but I've done this the last 10 years. Go to companies and develop standards or bring in standards and help the company grow. So I would be interested in following up the look, and HDR, in my opinion, is part of the look. So I would be willing to do it, to come to Dubai if I'm involved in the process from the stage of the content. And so I want to be creative director for the visuals. And they were thinking for a couple of days, and I said, okay, do it. So me not knowing what I'm getting into at this point, because it takes a lot of pre-work. So that's where I am at the moment. And I've developed basically 4 stages, and I'll explain these stages. And stage number 4 is post-production. So, but I want to start actually how to get into HDR, how to start, because I think this is interesting for a lot of you guys. When someone shot a film already and they come to me and we talk about how can we finish it in HDR and then Dolby Vision, I get always 2 questions. And the one is, oh, we did not shoot it in HDR. That's number 1. And the second question I always get is, we didn't shoot it for HDR. Completely different things. To shoot it in HDR implies that someone thinks you need a special camera, which you basically don't. Every camera above 12 stops of dynamic range, and that's basically every modern film cinema camera or digital cinema camera, like a Alexa, like a Red, like even the Sony Venice, the smaller Sony Venice, everything above 12 stops of dynamic range, and you should record it in RAW or in log C, is capable of doing HDR. And HDR is a process which happens in post-production. So you shoot like you have ever shot your movie before or your project, and the finishing happens in post-production. So HDR is something, especially Dolby Vision, which happens in post-production. That is important to know, because in post-production you have an HDR monitor and then you finalize it in HDR. So the other question, we didn't shoot it for HDR, means they shot it normal, not thinking about, do we have to think of something special, what happens in HDR? What do we have to light different? Do we have to adjust the lights? And even here, you can take your film and put it in HDR, but it makes more sense to have, for example, someone on set, to have a HDR monitor, a small one at least on set, and to check is the range of lights in comparison with the face, for example, is this okay? Is the practical too much? If I would show you this monitor here, which comes from here, this monitor in HDR would take the complete attention and take the attention away from my face. This would not be as much or so difficult or problematic in SDR, because the range is only here. And from face to the maximum highlight, that's only this range. But suddenly you have HDR, and imagine your monitor is here. So the difference is too much if my face would be here. So you need a bit more fine tuning in HDR. But I can tell you an example. We have recently regraded Kingdoms of Fire. This was a production which was done from Media, my employer now, in 2019 for $42 million. And they also didn't shoot with HDR in mind, but they finished in HDR. So we are doing the finishing now in HDR, and it's possible. So you can take anything, any project above 12 stops of dynamic range and take it out if you have the raw data and still finish it in HDR. That's this. So about the question, how do you start in HDR? And I can tell you my journey. My journey was that in 2017, we got an HDR monitor. It was a Sony X300 at FutureWorks in Mumbai. And we were playing with this monitor and had no idea about all the settings. And as you can imagine, all these monitors, they are so damn complicated. From the right gamma to the right EOTF, and what the hell. So we had no idea. I have to be frank about this. So we were just playing around with the monitor and it looked terrible. And we thought, okay, HDR looks terrible because we didn't know. And the other thing, your grading tool, if you use a Bayside, a Resolve, a Scratch, whatever, has to be aligned with the monitor. So you need the same settings on both sides. So basically the monitor was standing around for 1.5, almost 2 years. And everyone thought, yeah, HDR doesn't work and it looks terrible, until we got a training from Dolby. They came in, I think, for 3 days, A.B. Matthews and Bhaskar, and they were explaining us everything. And today, when a lot of my friends, colorists around the world, they ask me, hey, what's this setting, what's that setting? I said, just do it easy, get a training from Dolby. They do this, they certify you as a colorist, and costs a little bit, not much, and it takes 2-3 days. They do it online meanwhile, and it's the easiest thing. So get in touch with Dolby and they will teach you everything what you need for post-production. So after this, it still took us maybe 2-3 months to figure out all the settings, what's the best way to render it, what's the best way then to master it, because you need, let's say you have a clipster or transcoder in the end, which you need for mastering it for IMF, which is the format which goes to Netflix. So there's another thing, and how can you watch it on your monitor, on a normal TV display? So then which codec does it need? And this took us 2-3 months. And coming then to the next level, this is only the technical part. But once you figure it out, it's actually not that hard. So again, I recommend get Dolby involved, contact them if you want the post-production training, and they will do this for you. And then it's actually easy. The other thing is the artistic way of HDR. And here is one key sentence which I please want you to follow. So HDR for me is not a look. So if someone says it's a HDR look, this is something very terrible. HDR should be part of a look and should add up to the look, and maybe 20% max, because it's enhancing your look. So what HDR does, for example, you have a fire and you want this fire a little bit more to come out. You want more colors. You want to see the stars coming out. You want to see highlights, for example, on these these things. You want this separation. This is 20% max. So nothing should ever look like HDR. There's, for example, a big discussion at the moment in Germany, where the TV channels say, yeah, we are paying for HDR and we are selling it as HDR, and the audience must feel it's HDR. So you have to use the full range and it has to look like that. And all the colorists, they get mad and they say, no, we want it to look filmic, because it still has to look like a film, and it just shouldn't be like that. It should look still pleasing for the eyes. And I was recently in another post-production in, I don't say the country now, old friends of mine, And they asked me, hey, can you come over and check our HDR? Because our HDR looks so much different than the SDR. HDR looks amazing, it looks glowing and what HDR should be, and the SDR looks different. So okay, and I checked, and I had something in mind already what it could be. So, and they had this animation of exploding sun, I think, and it looked amazing in HDR. And I've checked the rest of their images, and they were super contrasty. And I said, okay, this looks nice, but for probably 2 minutes, because then I can't see it anymore. And then the flame artist comes in and says, oh, hey, Andy, how are you? And how can you see HDR all day long? I mean, you must get eye cancer. And I said, okay. So that's the misconception, because HDR should not be just bright. That's a complete different approach to it. HDR should be decent. It should be a nice cinematic image, like you want to see a film in the cinema or anywhere else. And just these little highlights, they should come out. So I've told these guys, it was, I think, on a resolve. Can you just take the contrast a little bit out and make it a little bit dimmer? And then change maybe the pivots of the gray. So the upper midtones, we stretch them a little bit up, and we get the rest down. And they were like, suddenly, I think it was an eye opener for them, because they suddenly, okay, it can look flatter or a little bit more compressed and pleasing. So what happened then? We put this one node over everything, and also on the animation, and everything got a little bit more down on the signal, was more pleasing to watch. And when they switched it to SDR, it was also okay. And the reason is, if you have this range in HDR, and you push everything here to the top, to the maximum of possible range, and then you go to the SDR, which is down here, of course, there's so much difference. But your image should never be up there. There should be some little elements. I think 10% of the image. That's it. So the rest should be somewhere here, because you want to watch the film for two hours, or in India 4 hours, or whatever. It depends on how many songs you have in the film. But basically everything should be somewhere here. And that's what I'm saying. HDR should be not a look, but it should be part of your look. It should enhance your image. And saying that, going a little bit into the technology of it, for the colorists, you should work in a scene referred color timeline. That's very important. So the timeline should not be limited. That's also what Bhaskar said before. You have to record it in RAW, in the most possible range. You shouldn't limit your range before, because once you cut it, it's done. And in the timeline, it's the same. You shouldn't limit your timeline. Your timeline should be even bigger than the content, than your delivery on the other end. So the way you do it, you work, for example, in ACES, or you work in TCAM for basslight. These are the two ways. Maybe there's another color space, I don't know. And later on, you just go from there to HDR. And it's very easy from a scene referred timeline to go to HDR, to SDR, to cinema. It's then very simple. And I can tell you that I did a lot of films which I just graded in HDR. It took me longer in the beginning, but now, meanwhile, I'm faster in HDR than SDR. And in a second, I'm just switching, it's there. So I'm telling also everyone, whatever project you come, I do it in HDR. I don't care if it's SDR, it's for cinema, I do it in HDR, because I have so much more to play. I can do the fine balancing here. I have more skin colors, for example, I have more separation. Let me do it on HDR. And then once I'm finished, the SDR, which is here, is automatically more fine balanced than if I would start in SDR before. So that's how we do it. And it's just faster. The way I did it in India, I just did the films in HDR and then told the producers in Netflix, it's HDR now. And they said, what? But we ordered SDR. I said, I don't care, it's HDR now, and now you take it. And in the end, they were happy. So this was a good learning experience for me. And this is all stage number 4, Dolby Vision. What I want to explain on Dolby Vision is specifically, because this is HDR, what we're talking about. So where's the difference to Dolby Vision? Dolby Vision is basically like, you think there's the cappuccino and it's the foam on top. So you have different displays. I have an iPhone, I have an Android phone, I have an LG television, I have a Sony television, and they all have a different capability of brightness. So the one has 500 nits, a TV, a normal TV without HDR is 100 nits, like Bhaskar explained before. We are grading at 1000 nits. So in Dolby Vision is adjusting. So let's say the TV has a chip inside, or the telephone, your iPhone has a chip inside. And if your iPhone has, I don't know, maybe 1,000 nits, it doesn't adjust. If you have an older iPhone with a Dolby chip, it says I have 600 nits. So it's adjusting automatically. And this is the Dolby Vision metadata. So that's why it's way finer than any other version of HDR, which there's HDR, HDR10, HDR10 Plus, and so on. So this is basically the best version of HDR you can get. And we now, in the new OTT platform next year, we're doing everything in HDR Dolby Vision. This was stage number 4. I said we have 3 stages or 4 stages. Going to stage number 3, how can I be sure that what I get in the end, in post-production, looks amazing? So, and I put a lot of thoughts in this and a lot of analyzing for months. So, but what's my 3 stages? Because so far as a colorist, I've only done stage number 4. If the DOP comes before we make some tests, good, but then I can't control it. It's out of my hands. So my new position said, no, I want to control it from the beginning. So stage number 3 is I'm being on set. And on set, what I do, I'm there for almost a week. I'm basically the second pair of eyes for the DOP. And I'm fine balancing the way a DOP works. And it was, to be honest, a very scary thing in the beginning that some DOPs might say, who are you? What do you want with me on set? So that they feel threatened, but they take it unbelievably positively because it's basically a reassurance for them. And as I said, a second pair of eyes for them, what I'm doing on set with them. So the way it works, we do a camera test on location, a lens test, a makeup test, and so on. And according to the set, interior and exterior, I'm making a LUT. And this LUT is 1 stop darker. So this has the advantage that we are preserving highlights because we press everything gets darker. So on the monitor, he sees a darker image. This darker image, you can also see if something is too dark. And that's very interesting. So I'm sitting next to the DIT, and the DIT and me, we're basically checking, we make the exposure, the DIT makes the exposure, and then we're seeing, okay, maybe you need a bit more fill over here. So I'm going to or you need a bit more of orange light or blue light here. And maybe there's too much smoke. And we had something that we had tube lights on one production at the moment in Beirut, and they were too bright. So on a normal monitor, you might not even be able to see it, but I have this little Atomos, I think it's the name, HDR monitor, and I'm seeing that these practicals are too light or too bright. So we go there with the dark spray and we're spraying all these tube lights a little bit darker. Or we have another light, or we have something which is overexposing. That's the thing you can't do. You can't overexpose on HDR because this will be a very ugly patch. Or we have a table practical table lamp, like here on a table, and the light bulb is facing the camera, which wouldn't be a big problem in SDR, but in HDR you would see the light bulb and nothing else. So we're turning the light bulb. These little things, which a DOP might not have the time to do it on set, because there's so much going on. And that's basically where I am. And I'm talking to the director, talking to the DOP, and we are fine adjusting and making everyone sensitive. What works in HDR, what doesn't work. So this is stage number 3, and it's very important. What is another example? I mean, there's so many. Basically, it's really about brightness, about darkness, and we are empowering also the DIT. So the DIT, he was always asking me, Andy, it's too dark. Should I say something? Of course, jump, tell him. I mean, he has to know this. And it's actually very interesting because I told this concept to the DOP all the time. We're shooting 1 stop darker, or I give it a LUT 1 stop darker, and you have 1 more range. The only thing he understood is, oh, I have 1 stop more range now. So he was checking it in his viewer and said, yeah, I have my force color, I see everything. So no, that's not how it works. You have to be at the monitor and check it at the monitor, and on the monitor, because this is the final look. This is really, it's the final look here. There you see if something is too dark, if something doesn't look brilliant. And then I came up with this idiom, this expression, we are grading on set. And this is what we do for all our projects now, and it looks amazing. They're coming out next year, so I can't show you, but it just look amazing. They look like the final grade. And grading on set doesn't mean on-set grading. Grading on set for me means We create the final look on set with the camera, with the exposure and with the light setup. So once it comes into my grading department, it's done. There's not much to do. And this is what I'm saying as a colorist with 4 base lights here. But I want the perfect look on set. And that's how Hollywood does it. And this is one thing I did in my studies, in my research. And why do some scenes, some series look so amazing and others don't? What's the difference? I mean, one thing is pre-production. So you basically have month of pre-production, while on another show, people just go into the shoot and maybe have 1 week of prep. So on big shows, you have concept design, you have previs, you have all this stuff, and depending on the money, you have more of it, more concept design. And see, on a show with $50 million, no one can take a risk. You can't take a risk like, oh, let's just go and shoot. I mean, a little bit over the top now, but that's how it happens very often. So you plan things. And one thing is really being on set. And if the dailies don't look correct, 100% correct, then there's a problem. So we are seeing the dailies, for example, every day on Frame.io. Of course, with a delay then of 8 hours. But I can say, okay, dude, I don't think this works. Or for example, we had too much smoke on set. So the smoke is taking out the contrast. Smoke in the background is a good thing because it's filling up. Smoke in the foreground is bad because it takes all the contrast away. So these things you can basically fine tune on set. That's my job. I go on set for the first week. I make the DOP and the DIT more sensitive. Also the director. In the end, the director was always asking, Andy, is this enough light? Is this good? And then yes. So, but it also works. You have to be a good team. You need a good team spirit on set. But this is basically stage number 2. So number 3. Stage number 4 is post-production. Stage number 3 is being on set and really fine-tuning your HDR. Another reason which I didn't explain why to do it, because in my opinion, you have between the brightest light and, for example, the face, and that's what everything is concentrating on, a maximum of 2 stops difference should be, because otherwise everyone is concentrating on this light here. If you can even dial it down to 1 stop, and that's what I'm doing on set, there's only 1 stop difference. So it's almost the same. Because I don't want the full attention to go here. And this is happening sadly in HDR. You have more range, but also you have more attention on the brightest point. So you have to work a little bit more precise than in SDR. Coming to stage number 2 now. Stage number 2 is the pre-production. Always with HDR in mind. And the pre-production happens with the DOP. A lot of discussions about lenses where we really work very close together. Not only me, we have a full creative team here with production designers, with creative producers, and everyone works in a team together. And pre-production is, in this case, essential. So, for example, I can tell you one example. We had the first show where the DOP wanted to work on a Venice with master primes. And I said, I don't think this will work, because it will work definitely, but I think it's sharp on sharp. So why don't you use signature primes? So he was testing and said, okay, I never had signature primes, but I like them. So we're going through the list, we're going through the looks. This will also come in stage number 1. And there's a lot of discussion, which kind of framing are we using, which kind of technology are we using? Are we using a technocrane? Are we using a Jimmy Cheap? Are we using this, that? What's the light? And I can tell you one example why this is important. So there was one show which I came in very late. I was not working here yet. So the director, DOP were set already, and nice guys. And then I see the light list. And on the light list, I don't see any big light, all smaller lights. No 12 kW, no M90, nothing, which you need basically to light out windows. And if you have more windows, you need for everyone 1 light. So, and I give it to my contacts at ARRI and said, there's no big light, right? And they said, no, I don't know, maybe he doesn't want to make light. And I said, okay, okay. So, and I asked the DOP, I said, why is there no big light? And he says, yeah, because the director, this is my fight always with the director for the last 3 projects. And he doesn't want to show windows and he doesn't want to make white shots. I say, what? No, he doesn't want to make white shots. And I'm fighting, saying, oh my goodness. So does anyone know about this? So I said, no, you need bigger lights. Really, we have to light out the windows. And then at the same time, I hear that the director's last project, they had to reshoot 40% with another director. So these are the things which happen in pre-production. And coming to HDR, they wanted to make a light cage because that's what they've done with the last project. So a light cage out of tube lights. And this doesn't work in HDR because you will have your attention on this light cage, 3-dimensional light cage, but not on the face. So there's a lot of discussion and a lot of things going on, which you have to clear up front. Because later on set, it's too late. You have to do this in the pre-production. What kind of light, what kind of setting, what kind of look. A lot of look discussion. And this basically comes to stage number 1. So stage number 2 is basically pre-production. Stage number 1, this is only me and the creative team. We're getting the Bible. I'm reading the Bible and I'm analyzing the Bible. So I think everyone knows what the Bible is, basically the script or the pre-version of the script. And then thinking, okay, in which direction could this go? And for this, I want to show you a tool which I've developed. How can you analyze a script on the visual side? So first I go through the genre. 1 second. So let's say it's a thriller. It's a little bit of mystery inside and a bit of action. Okay. And what is the speed? What is the speed of editing? So for me, I think this script, what I've read now, I don't give it a name, just use a XYZ script. It's fast. And the secondary speed is maybe normal. This is really important for the look later on. So I have the audience. For whom is it? It all affects the look. What's the day-night ratio? What's the time period? Just showing you. Okay. Interior, exterior. And then I said, okay, how can I describe mood? What do I feel? What do other people feel when they read the script? How uplifting is it? Maybe if it's not uplifting at all, let's put it down a little bit. If it's scary, put it up to a 10. So, and that's my first indicator. How can I measure a look? Then I'm asking myself questions. How real does the story feel? Is it like a True Detectives or 24? Or is it like a Harry Potter? So I have all these questions, which I ask myself, I ask other people, I ask the team, I ask the script writers. And then I'm going into references. For example, because I know, like we have said here, there's a thriller and it's mystery and a little bit of action. Let's check what are mystery films. And I go through all the references. Even Harry Potter has a lot of mystery in there. And then I see, for example, Arrival. I thought, okay, this might be a nice look, Arrival. I zoom in a little bit. And the color scheme here is analogous. So analogous means it's all the same colors. In this case, very bluish, different kinds of blue. That, okay, does this work? And I go back to my look development. No, it wouldn't work because Arrival is a very slow story. A super slow edit. But I have here a very fast edit. So analogous, where you don't have any separation in the look, wouldn't work for me. So I have to find another look. I said, okay, but can I use some elements from here? What do I like here? I like these tube lights. Remember I was talking about the tube lights? But I want them maybe only with 20% as ambience light. And the rest, maybe we split it a little bit, go in orange and teal. It's interesting. And I like, for example, that image. Why? Because the mystery is shining from the bottom. They have a light coming up. So, and this and many other indicators, that's basically where I start finding the look for the show. And then I hired, I'm not doing this always, but sometimes I'm hiring 3D artists to create me a police station. Because in this case, I need a police station. And here I can always already think about, okay, what kind of interior design can we have? What kind of look can we have? And how does this work in HDR? There's always a combination with HDR. If these windows are too bright, they will take all the attention. So that's how I'm designing the look. So this is stage number one. What else is in stage number one? Once I have the direction of a look, I'm basically checking for DOPs. We have a huge list of DOPs. I see Yannis here is in the session. He's one of our DOPs, which we want to use. Excellent DOP, by the way. And I make a shortlist for DOPs who could work, who could fit into this color scheme, who could shoot like this. So basically, I'm setting the look and the HDR preferences from the beginning, before we even start, from the script. So then we talk to DOPs. Are you available? Is the money also correct? Would this work with you? And from the beginning, basically, that's a very important thing. There's one thing starting, I think, from Turkey to the Middle East to Asia. I see a lot of strong leaders on set. I see a very strong DOP, and an even stronger director, and they're ruling everything. So, and this might be okay, but sometimes it's problematic, because if what I see in Europe and the US, you have strong teams. You still have a strong leader, but you have strong teams. That's just the difference, and that's why I'm also on set. I try to build up teams that when, for example, the DIT goes to the DOP and says, I don't think this light is correct, that the DOP doesn't freak out and the career of this guy. Like, imagine one assistant of a big DOP in India would say, sir, I think the light is shit. I think this would be the end of his career. And I've trained my assistants, for example, in color grading to tell me exactly this. If you don't think this looks right, then tell me. I might be offended for exactly 2 seconds, and then I'm thinking, yes, it's correct. So one of the process in stage number one is to build up strong teams and to make this clear from the beginning. I want a team. I don't want a leader. So if and we all work together, and everyone has a voice, and everyone brings something to the table. And I've had other things, like it was in India, I think. The VFX supervisor comes in the morning, totally shocked, and said, today we were shooting green screen, but it was not on the plan because suddenly the plan has changed. Or one thing on set, like, you have the location, but you have to shoot at this location for 2 days. Doesn't matter which light. And with a strong team, you can, how can I say, overrule of these things. You can work together, and that's what we're trying to implement. So this is stage number one. Stage number one is creating the look up front, getting the right people in place to carry this through. And again, because it's an HDR session, it's all about having HDR in mind. There's also a good thing for me that the DOPs are listening, because not too many DOPs have experience with HDR. They think, okay, I have to do something special. I'm listening to the guy. So I get them all in one boat. I take the easygoing guys, and then we carry this forward to stage number two, which is the pre-production. Pre-production is we discuss everything through. We have multiple sessions, from the production design to everything, from the technology to the framing, to how we approach the HDR. This works in HDR, this doesn't work in HDR. Coming to stage number three is then me being on set. Or can also be someone else. At the moment, it's me. In the future, I think I will train people, and also we try to work with the same DITs. And for us, a DIT is not a data copy guy. For us, a DIT is really essential, who works under exposure, who is the second pair of eyes for the DOP and tells him really, hey, I think there's something off, or we need a little bit more light here, or whatever, or the highlights are overexposed. Because a DOP has so much to do on set, from framing to, it's just crazy. So he needs strong people around him. And number four is then the post-production. And that's basically the process I have developed, or I'm going in. And so far it works amazing. So that's how I do it. That's how I approach it. Yeah, and I think that's it from my side, Gaurav. So to make it short, I think we will have a lot of questions later, but that's in quick how my process is.
Thanks, Andy. That was a lovely explanation of the entire process. from pre-production to your ready. So now, Sean also, and Sean, you can maybe unmute yourself. You're still muted. So just to, I think we have Sean here basically, to explain to us, the how Disney Hotstar has adopted Dolby Vision and how they've successfully released a bunch of titles on the platform, and most interestingly, in context of all you content creators attending the session today, which is focused on primarily short form content. So there's something called Hotstar Quicks, and I think what we have been discussing of late with Sean is how short form content can really benefit by using Dolby Vision HDR to kind of enhance the overall look of the content, make it even more glamorous, so to say, or kind of help to you know enhance the storytelling by better images. And one thing which I did not explain in my presentation was how the Dolby Vision technology can actually benefit by even allowing you to watch your images in a much more intimate way on smaller screens like your mobile screens, for example. So because by introducing Dolby Vision, technology into your images, you're able to, craft your image with so much details. Not just brighter colors, more brightness, overall brightness wherever required, but so much more details even in the dark. And as Andy mentioned, and he can even maybe if you can remember of some example, he can talk about. You can just add to it later on. So when you're watching something on a big screen, it's fine. The big screen automatically allows you to see so much more details. But what about when you're watching on a small screen? So that's where the Dolby Vision can actually make it much more interesting. You will actually, once you see it in Dolby Vision, you realize how much more. It's almost like seeing a complete new version of that image again. So that's what we were discussing, how Hotstar Quicks can encourage the short form content creators to actually create content in Dolby Vision. And so over to you, Sean. You can explain. You can talk about a little bit of your experience with Dolby Vision.
Thanks, Bhaskar. So yeah, Dolby Vision, basically we collaborated with the Dolby team exactly, I think it was 3 years ago when we set the standards for Hotstar. And we've been working with Dolby quite closely, I think, for the last 10 years on broadcast. So this time the Dolby team came up to us and said, why not, we try out something new. And since it was an OTT platform, we could experiment a lot, derive a lot from technology and put it to the consumer. So basically we designed a tech specs where we only thought we will only shoot ultra high def, which is 4K. And we will implement Dolby Atmos along with Dolby Vision and HDR10. And that's where we begin our journey on producing original content for Hotstar in Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos. We have seen a drastic change where color reproduction, picture quality is there. Basically, it gives a lot of flexibility, and I would say to the DOP, to the grading artist, and to the director to play around and basically tell the story in a different way. Whereas if you compare to a HDR or a HD technology, you're limited to your colors and your contrast, your blacks, your whites. Whereas with Dolby technology, the Dolby Vision technology, it gives you an open space to play out with colors. Along with your contrast, highlights, your blacks, you can tweak around and you can just see what you see with your real eyes. You can see it on screen. So that has helped us develop our content in a much better way. It has brought out the quality, it has brought out the color reproduction, and it has set a benchmark. So as of today, we are from Jan 2021 onwards, all our projects are basically delivered in Dolby Vision. and in HDR10. And we have also put it up on the platform basically for viewers to see it. So all the premium customers of Hotstar can see the content today in Dolby Vision or HDR10, depending on the device that they have, We are also looking going forward to even great short form content where we have something like Bhaskar said, Quicks, Hotstar Quicks, where, it's mainly caters to mobile viewers, someone who's traveling, someone who's always on the mobile and just wants to change and wants to see some type of short content. We are targeting that as well. And there is some development happening with the Dolby team on that. So very soon, I think in the next couple of months or early next year, you should be able to see even the short form content graded in Dolby Vision. And basically, we've got good reviews as well. The directors are happy, the production house is happy, the grading artist, because it's a new technology and we're exploring it to the fullest. That has helped us a lot to shift the needle from where we were on the technology front to a different level altogether. Yeah, so Bhaskar, that's what it is. It has helped us a lot in basically the entire pipeline. The pipeline is quite different. We align the DOPs, the studios, the grading artists, the directors. We ensure that all the parameters are met. We do a test shoot before we go into a production because that's very, very important for all the stakeholders on that particular show or the series to ensure that what we are getting into, what is going to be the final output, what's going to be the formats, how the colors going to look. So we get into an extensive test shoot before we commence the actual shoot. We do a bit of day scene, night scene, indoors, outdoors with decent lighting. And we try and export the formats out in Dolby Vision and the other rest of the formats to just check on the colors, levels, and all the other parameters. We also do another check, which is on our Hotstar platform at the backend to ensure that the files and the colors are, looking as per the standards and it looks true to every display.
Okay, thanks, Sean. Great
Yeah.
to hear from you and the experience that you had. And
yeah.
So over to Gaurav. I think you would.
I have a question for Sean.
Yeah.
Are you testing it on different devices then, on an iPhone, on a monitor, and so on?
Yes. So Andy, what happens is we do a test shoot and we churn out the clips, the test clips in various master formats. Yeah, the final master formats. Once we get these test clips, we take it to a backend team. They transcode it to various bit rates as per the platform's requirement. It's a bitrate ladder, and we check it like on an Android phone, on an Apple phone, Apple TV, on a Sony TV. We check it on 2-3 other devices on a tablet and to see how the color reproduction, how is the XML database working with it, just to ensure that the colors are in proper specs. And then we create a QC report out of those test files, and then we tell the production house, okay, these files are working now. We are all on the same page, so you know what specs to shoot in and how your colors need to be set in the grading studio.
That's good. I can bring one thing in there. Whenever you send something in the pandemic, you had to send so much to DOPs. And I send it in SDR. I was never sure what they see. It was on every monitor different, on every, it was to a point terrible. There's one guy said, it looks amazing. The other guy said, it looks terrible, because you never know where he's seeing it. And I felt, and there's one thing, because sometimes you have dark images and I need this last 10%. I need them because I'm working very fine. How much do you see of his face? You don't see anything, or you just see a little bit, these things. And the moment we switched to a HDR review possibility, for example, on Frame.io, or there are many, I thought on different iPhones even, it looks closer on different devices, not even iPhone, on everything, it looks closer now. Suddenly I don't feel insecure anymore. I have no idea what's going out. But on HDR, I feel it looks closer to what I've graded. It doesn't matter on which device. Yes. This is a very helpful thing for me. Takes a lot of headache away.
Yeah. We also, what we do is so since we've been calling in for Dolby Vision, we also call for the HDR version and the high-def version. Mm-hmm. So the DOP and the grading artist gets a good sense of how the grade would finally look in the masters.
Yeah, it looks more consistent somehow.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the whole point of like I said, the two main objectives was to have consistent image reproduction across various devices, and obviously get a much better overall image quality. So yeah, so Gaurav, over to you. How do you open up the Q&A session?
Sure, sir. So what I'll do is, before now we move on to the Q&A session, but before we do that, I have a small announcement to make, quite an important announcement. So our friends at Dolby, Bhaskar sir and Asif sir, have decided to help few creators upgrade their projects with Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos technology. So you can submit your existing or upcoming project for the same. Soham from my team will share the form here where you can submit your projects. Soham, if you could. Okay, that's great. So the form is there. After the session, you can fill the form. And Soham, if you could also open up the chat box so that people can send their questions. Yes, so we have opened up the chat box. You may start, sending your questions in, and yeah, we'll take it ahead from there. Okay, so we have first question. Hina Gupta is asking, please talk more about Dolby technology in iPhone. Which smartphone is the best while creating content? Is it going to be any different in the new upcoming iPhone 13 with so much content being created on smartphone? It's important for us creators to know about this. Or do you also engage in small budget projects? So kind of a lot of questions, but yeah. So yeah, to sum it up, which smartphone is ideal to shoot, content with Dolby technology, keeping the Dolby technology in mind? Bhaskar sir.
Is she asking about shooting or about watching it?
Creating content, shooting it.
Shooting.
Okay, so 1 second. So the questions keep rolling.
Yeah, so many questions. So the first question by Hina Gupta. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so one question I think was about what was the iPhone thing, which smartphone is the best while creating content. Is it going to be any different?
Different in the new upcoming iPhone 13. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. Next is a comment.
It's a difficult question, I guess. I would say it's all about how much dynamic range do you have on your camera. Is this doesn't matter if it's an iPhone or any other or Alexa, or you need this dynamic range. So I'm assuming that every iPhone is getting better anyway. So probably the iPhone, the next version will have more dynamic range, and that's going back to the beginning. You need all this dynamic range. You don't want a compressed image. You want, like, I think on a GoPro, you're a little bit compressed. You want this dynamic range, and then you can make HDR. Everything above 12 stops of dynamic range.
Yeah. Okay. So it's not just about iPhone. It's like Andy said. So any of the high-end modern phones today have excellent capture quality, and as long as what is important to note is, do they allow you to record? I mean, when you capture that, is it getting recorded in some form of less compressed file format? That is what is most important, because if it is not allowing you to record in a, I won't say uncompressed format, because obviously on phones you can't expect that, but in a format which will have less compression, so then that image will be easier to work with in the post when you want to enhance the image in the color grading eventually. So hopefully that should have answered that question. And as new model of cameras comes, I think they'll just get better and better.
Great. Arjun Suri is asking, since we tend to see less colors as ambient brightness goes down, how does that impact our perception of colors in a dimly lit cinema? Will cinema projector be able to project at 10K nits and above? If yes, how soon do you think we can see that happening? And if not, how will the lack of brightness impact color perception even with Dolby Vision content?
So I'm not quite sure. Yeah, I understand the question correctly, because when your ambient light goes down, you're able to see the image on screen better.
Yeah, what he asks is, if you watch, for example, in sunlight on your iPhone, does it look different in a cinema where everything is darker? And So the ambient light in a cinema is darker because you're in a dark room.
No, I think what he meant was most modern devices have ambient light compensation. I mean, like actually it's the other way. It works the other way around. So, for example, on your phones or on your laptops, the camera is used as an ambient light sensor, and then if you're in a darker room, the image on the screen is made less brighter to compensate for your eyes not getting bombarded with extreme bright images, because our eyes are trying to adjust to the overall ambient lighting, which is now less. So because it's trying to reduce the overall brightness, so you might be seeing the colors getting slightly muted. I think that was probably what was meant in that question.
Okay.
So this happens only with devices like a laptop and iPhones or iPads. I mean, not just iPhone. I mean any mobile phone. A cinema does not have that, right? A cinema is where you have projected images on the screen. It's not compensating for the ambient brightness or anything, and the ambient brightness in a cinema is already controlled. So I don't think that question is really relevant for cinema projection. But if you look at televisions, Dolby Vision television, so there's something really interesting that has been added, which is called IQ. Dolby Vision IQ, and what this does is basically now different people have different preferences for viewing television, or whatever they're watching on the television screen. Some people like a little brighter room when they're watching stuff. Some people like to have the room more darker, and obviously the ambient light does affect the perception of the colors or the brightness of the screen. And now a TV again, typically unlike mobile and laptop screens, will not adjust to ambient light, and that is why if you dim your light in the room, the image will appear too bright maybe. And especially with modern day TVs which go up to 1000 nits or more, that can be really, really too bright. So the new technology, the Dolby Vision IQ, actually does exactly that. It compensates for ambient light. So it will kind of adjust the whole image on the screen if your ambient light goes up or down, trying to maintain the look of the image that was intended. So it'll, if it's reducing the brightness of the image, it will compensate for any perception of color loss or something. That's a very, very complicated, intelligent algorithm that works, and you have this facility on some of the modern televisions. So that really is helpful. I think if that answers Arjun's question.
Okay.
I can add to this if you want.
Mhm.
In a cinema, what we have in a cinema is basically that we have a magic hour. It's the same light condition like in a magic hour, where we have the rods and the cones both activated, which happens like 7 o'clock in India. This is exactly the same ambience light what we have in a cinema. So that's why color grading for cinema you do on a big screen and not on a monitor usually, because the ambient light is just different. And doing this in HDR, you have to grade it on an HDR possible projector, which there are not many at the moment, but I think there will be more. And I think it's 100 nits, right, in the cinema.
108, yeah.
100 nits. But you don't want, coming back also to the beginning, you don't want to lose your look. You don't want to use this very dim filmic approach. So this is the same. It's just these little spikes of highlights can go to 100 nits because you don't want a super bright image also in the cinema. So the ambience light has to be, or the ambience awareness has to be still the same like before.
Agreed. So Prathmesh is asking, is HDR effect necessary for every type of film, or it depends on the film?
Andreas, that's your question.
Yeah. Remember when I said HDR adds up to the look and might be 20%. So it's not an effect. It should not be an effect. You should not feel this is HDR, like you should not feel an edit or you should not feel the camera. You should be in the story. When the moment I feel, this is a terrible edit or whatever, I'm out of the story. And HDR is exactly the same. It adds up to the look. So it makes let's put it blank, it makes the image nicer. But you shouldn't think, this looks like HDR, this looks not like HDR. So then it's wrong. That's what I'm saying. It should be 20% max, and that's why you have to control it.
Okay, Mohammed is asking, what is the minimal needs for reference monitor in grading?
At the moment, you can only get 1,000 nits. I think 2,000 are coming out, but everyone worldwide at the moment is grading at 1,000 nits peak
And that's
maximum.
Also what is Dolby recommended. As a mastering grade reference monitor, you should have a monitor which can minimum, do 1,000 nits.
Okay. I guess similar question, but I just wanted to get it out. Hitendra is asking, what is the basic setting required for starting Dolby Vision color grading in DI software?
Okay, I'll just briefly talk about it. So I think depending on the software that you're using, there are, for example, Basslight, Resolve, then Mystica. They all support Dolby Vision color grading, and the minimum that you need is your software, which is Dolby Vision compatible, and HDR monitor, which can do a minimum 1,000 nits. And there are other minimum specs like the contrast ratio, which is very important. So if you have a monitor which probably does something close to 1,000 nits, but is very, very low contrast monitor, that will obviously not look good at all. And so if you go to the Dolby website, and if you go to the content creator section, there's tons of information, interesting videos talking about Dolby Vision, grading, and you can take a look at that. You'll also find the details of the minimum specs of the Dolby Vision grading reference monitor there. But yeah, 1,000 nits is, and the minimum that you need is a software and a proper HDR monitor. That's
Okay.
all.
Okay, Raj Bhushan is asking, I made a documentary with DS250 camera 10 years back. Can I convert it in HD now?
In HDR, let's say you can take anything even below 12 stops of dynamic range into HDR, but you might face that the highlight details and everything is not there. So any footage you can take, put it in HDR, but it will not look as good as you shoot it with raw footage. So if you still the raw footage, if the camera, I don't know the camera, is above roughly 12 stops of dynamic range, you will have the details. If he has a output which is limited to Rec 709, you can still bring it in HDR, but it will of course not look as amazing as you shoot it for HDR. It's like comparing, like you take an old VHS cassette and bring it up to 4K. This is also not great.
Okay, got it. So Bhuvan is asking, as a DOP, I guess you have, as a DOP, what should one have in mind for shooting a project in Dolby Vision? The working style and something should one keep in mind during the production as well. I guess you summed it up earlier, but if you could, sum it up again for the,
I can say it again. So you're not shooting in Dolby Vision, you're shooting it normal for HDR, and then the mastering happens in Dolby Vision. But I know what he means. On set, what should you do? You should never overexpose. You can't overexpose. That's the only thing. So clip your highlights. You can of course overexpose a stop and so on, or two stops, but you can't clip your highlights, to say it correctly, because they will turn into patches. So, but it's very unlikely that someone these days is clipping because the camera has so much range. You please tell me, use a light meter on set, like classical, do your normal light. And the fine tuning is, I would recommend a small HDR monitor. These, I think they're called Atomos. There you can see immediately if something is overwhelming. If there's, for example, a tube light which is too bright, then you have to dim it down. So you have to take care that, because now the storytelling is changing, that too bright elements in the image are taking attention. So you have to bring them closer to the actor or to the brightness of the actor. And this is what you would probably not see on an SDR monitor, but you will see it on an HDR monitor. And that's it. Once you have done this 2-3 times and a little bit sensitive, it's not a big issue anymore, I guess.
Avi is asking, what is the biggest challenge in coloring low light footage, and how do you fix it other than the reshoot option?
I would say reshoot. No, if you see it in SDR, you might say, okay, there is nothing there anymore. Then that's very interesting. You switch it to HDR and you suddenly see a bit more of details because now you have more range. I did this test. Also, we had recently something where the producer said, is this too dark? Is this too dark? And we checked it in HDR and suddenly you have all these more details in the blacks. So HDR gives you more, also a bit more safety, I would say. Coming back to the question also before, what I've mentioned before, please take a LUT, make this LUT one stop darker and shoot through this LUT. And you will immediately see if something's too dark and you protect your highlights. And means you can on set fill it up with light. And the other thing on grading, I mean, in the worst case, you can stretch this low signals, these 10%, which I've mentioned before. And if there's too much noise, then you have to denoise it. That's a post thing then. Yeah.
Okay. Can I correctly integrate Dolby Vision in my project while I'm using VESA HDR 600 display?
I don't know, the Vesa's HDR 600.
Okay.
I think there's a consumer television. Bhaskar, do you know this?
No, I'm not familiar with this either. So the HDR.
I mean, you should use a calibrated monitor, and I recommend the Netflix specs. When you check on the Netflix site, there are some monitors which you should use.
Correct. And by the name, if it is saying HDR 600, probably it does 600 nits.
600.
So ideally, what we also say is if you're a colorist and if you're doing any color grading work, you would be working on content for a particular service provider. So generally, a service provider who's taking Dolby Vision deliveries, for example, or HDR deliveries in general, would have their own specs and requirements, and we strongly urge you to take a look at those specs and check. Sometimes they would also have their own recommendation of what is the minimum, quality of mastering display that is required to accurately, judge your final output. So you may want, if you're doing something for a project, something for, say, for Netflix, or rather wanting to do a project for Netflix on this VESA HDR 600 display, you should reach out to Netflix and check with them if, for example, this is something that would be accepted. So that's what we generally recommend. But going by the basic number of this display, if it just does 600 nits, then we wouldn't recommend using this as a mastering grade monitor.
Okay.
Then can we grade Dolby Vision with LG C8? Okay. So again, that's a consumer television. It's a Dolby Vision television, and while it does approximately about 650 nits, we do not recommend using a Dolby Vision television as a reference for grading because unlike professional mastering monitors where each screen or each display is calibrated accurately for the color space that it's supposed to reproduce and for the brightness that it's supposed to be able to meet, consumer televisions would not have, a properly calibrated display panel, for example.
We had the LG, and I think the LGs are amazing displays. We had the C8 as a secondary display above the grading monitor, and it comes very close after calibration, so you have to calibrate this also, and it's not cheap, but it's not 100% there. It's a good indicator what later the consumer will see, but after calibration it's still not 100% there. I would say maybe on 80%. So I would not recommend to grade on a LG display or any consumer display.
Okay. Next question is, what is the minimal nits number for a reference monitor for grading in Dolby Vision? Is also
we had this already. I think 1,000 nits.
Okay, 1,000 nits. Okay. Next question is, Can you please talk more about creating LUTs for using RED camera, RED, during the production?
The same thing, doesn't matter Alexa or Red. You take a Resolve or a basslight on set. Of course, not the big one. You take the software, and you take the footage in. You take it one stop down. So in basslight, it's quite easy because you can exactly measure what's one stop, and put the look on top what you want. Measure that it's still one stop. Give it out and feed it into the camera. And I make basically 3 LUTs always, or I give one for the camera, one for the DIT, and also in different formats. So they can put it on the dailies later, they can put it on the camera. And what's quite interesting on the Alexa, I don't know if this works with the Red, but on the Alexa, once the DIT puts a LUT on the footage, it's in the metadata. So later on, when you make the dailies in the lab, it's automatically there, so you don't have to apply it extra. It says, okay, he used this LUT for interior and the other one for exterior. It's already there. You just have to activate it.
Got it. Bhaskar sir, if you want to pick a question.
Yeah, I'm just looking at
So many
the
questions
list
there.
of questions.
I'm seeing
yeah,
80 plus
so
questions
just
and we
looking
are
at-
halfway through.
Yeah. So I think there's one question here about Dolby Vision, STR imaging on large screens, that is in cinemas. So yes, we have something that we call Dolby Cinema, which uses Dolby Vision technology. And while in India we do not have a Dolby Vision Cinema today, but we were very close to actually launching a couple of screens just before the pandemic happened. And because of that, I think things got delayed. So now it's up to as all of you are aware, the whole exhibition, theatrical exhibition business is, in a very bad shape right now. But I think when that overall situation improves, we will definitely have, a Dolby Vision cinema coming up, and a few screens would be available in India for people to experience that as well. And hope that answers your question. Then
There's a very good question for Sean. Is there a difference between nit rates while watching Dolby Vision in 4K UHD Blu-ray versus streaming devices like Disney Hotstar?
Yeah, there would be, because the Blu-ray mastering that is done a bit differently with the Dolby Vision. But we normally target, like for OTT, we target the 1000 nits. And we play around between that. We do not go right up to 1000 nits, but we play around somewhere between, I would say, 400 to 800 nits.
Okay.
Is this in your mastering, or is it in the color grading that you tell your colorist, I want you to be between this range?
Yeah. So normally we do not. It's before the mastering. So when we're doing the color grading, it's between 800 to 400 nits. We do not go the complete full throttle on 1000 nits. So it's like you said, right? When you watch the content, you should say the content is looking good, and you should not identify between HDR and HDR. So we try and maintain that balance between both the content.
That's very good. You're way ahead of the German national team.
Because a lot of people target saying, oh, this is HDR content and this is HDR content.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Good.
Agreed. Akash is asking, hi Andreas, if it's possible, can you screen share a basic Dolby Vision HDR grading? Just want to know how you organize and start the project.
I don't have a baseline here on this MacBook.
No worries.
But how I do it, like a normal grading, honestly, layer, everything the same. In the end comes basically the Dolby Vision analyzer. This one strip where we're analyzing it. Then we get the metadata. And we say this is the maximum 1000 nits, and this is the base where it can calculate to the 100 nits, the SDR, and everything in between. And then you have one more layer, which is it's called the L2. So the analyzer is the L1. The next one is the L2, where you can make on the down convert to the SDR, to the 100 nits, a little bit of changes then on the 100 nits, but it's not much that you have to do.
Got it.
Basic, nothing special.
Cool. We have a question for Bhaskar, sir. Dennis is asking, I don't see many platforms supporting HDR or Dolby Vision. What other platform are working on Dolby Vision for delivery?
Netflix.
See, okay, so we have quite a few platforms which are already delivering Dolby Vision. So we have both Netflix, Amazon Prime Video, then we have Disney Plus, Hotstar, obviously, and these are the three main right now which have Dolby Vision content. And we are already talking to a lot of other service providers across the nation, and there's a lot of interest. But because it involves some workflow changes and some infrastructure modifications, so it will take a while for other platforms also to start delivering Dolby Vision. But yes, I think we will have a few more services very soon.
Okay.
Adding on this, I would recommend every content producer today already to think of HDR, Dolby Vision, and to master in HDR. Doesn't matter if you sell it and they bought SDR, but because in a couple of years, maybe everyone wants HDR. And if you don't do it now, later you have to take out the footage and do it again. So you can just do it and from there make a SDR. That's what we did. Remember, we did it with Kali Pili?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
We did the HDR.
Because,
they asked, yeah.
Yeah, because unlike your daily soaps or, for example, even theatrical movies, it's not that your content is released and then within a week or 2 weeks people forget about it and then don't really look. Once on the OTT platform, once your content is there for decades. So people will go back and look at it every now and then. People from different generations will go back and search for that content and look at it. So even if today some services are not able to deliver Dolby Vision, or maybe there are some devices which are not yet capable of Dolby Vision, but within a short span of time there will be more services, there will be more devices, and then your content becomes less attractive to viewers if it's not as appealing as compared to other content that is already in Dolby Vision. So it makes perfect sense, like what Andy said, get your content, done in the highest format that is possible today, and whether you need to deliver or not as HDR, you have your master created in the highest format, and then you can deliver to any level that is required today. But at any point of time, you can go back and put that Dolby Vision HDR also on the platform if that service gets enabled. So in fact, that's something similar that's happening. Just as an analogy, I'll just say that Dolby Atmos was introduced in India in 2012, and it's more than 9 years now. So while we have more than, or rather close to 800 movie titles that have already been done in Dolby Atmos, not everything was put on OTT platforms in the Dolby Atmos one. But today, people are going back and kind of taking the theatrical Atmos master and converting it for the home Atmos master or the OTT master, and they are adding the Atmos version of audio to all those old catalog content. So that's the kind of relevance that is there. Similarly, 2 years from now, the same story will be repeated for your video, and then people will want the Dolby Vision master for that particular show or movie. So that's how it kind of becomes very relevant.
Got it. We are way over time, but if you want to take a couple of more questions, let's do that.
Actually, the whole chat window keeps scrolling up and down on its own.
Yes.
I saw some interesting questions and now I'm trying to
Find
it.
Yeah.
I have one. Mr. Andreas was talking about SDR being nice, because it was pre-done in HDR. Can you elaborate?
Yes.
It's quite easy. I see more in HDR, so I can work finer on the details, on the colors, on everything. And the moment you bring it back to SDR, you are, of course, taking this finer work into SDR, which I could not see before in SDR. Easy. Can we work in ACES and export it in Dolby Vision? Yes, this adds up to your timeline should be scene referred and ACES is scene referred. It means your timeline is bigger than your output color space. So always work scene referred, which is ACES or TCAM. Yes.
Also, Ravi Teja is asking, Andreas, can you share the template, the tool you showed for analyzing the script? That would be really helpful.
No, can't, because this is my baby. I've never shown it to anyone before, to be honest.
Oh, great.
It was only internal, and for me, basically, how I'm analyzing scripts.
Agreed.
And
so
to
you
connect,
can make your own.
Connect them.
Yes.
Yeah, you can make your own to connect it to visual. Because I don't think there's anything like this where you connect or to analyze a story and then with parameters and say how fast is the edit, how slow, how much night, then connect this basically to what should the visual be, or does this visual fulfill the criteria and is enough. So, but think about it, you come up with your own tool, I guess.
Agreed. So yeah, that's pretty much the kind of questions that we had. I would like to conclude this session by thanking you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.